There's something most men never fully understand about why a woman chooses to become intimate with one man and not another. And the truth is, it's rarely as simple as attraction in the way most people think about it. It's not just about looks. It's not just about confidence. It's not even just about chemistry. Because if it were that simple, the patterns would be obvious. The same type of man would always get the same results. But that's not what happens in reality. Instead, you'll often see something that doesn't quite make sense on the surface. A man who isn't the most attractive in the room, yet she's drawn to him. A man who isn't trying as hard as others, yet she gravitates toward him. And other men, who seem to be doing everything right, still remain on the outside of that connection. That's where most men get confused, because they're looking at the outcome without understanding the internal experience that led to it. What actually drives a woman to that level of closeness is far more subtle. It's emotional. It's psychological. And in many cases, it happens beneath conscious awareness. She doesn't always sit there analyzing it step by step. She simply feels something shift. A sense of comfort, a sense of curiosity, a sense of openness that wasn't there before. And when those internal shifts align in the right way, intimacy becomes something that feels natural, not forced. That's why trying to convince or push your way into attraction almost never works, because you're focusing on the surface while the real decision is happening somewhere deeper. So instead of asking, "What do I need to do?" the better question becomes, "What does she need to feel?" Because everything starts there. The first reason this shift happens is something most men completely overlook, even though it's right in front of them. She feels emotionally safe. Now, this doesn't mean comfort in the basic sense. It doesn't mean she's simply relaxed or having a good time. Emotional safety goes deeper than that. It's the feeling that she can exist in that moment without being judged, without being rushed, without feeling like there's an expectation she has to meet. And that kind of safety is rare. Most interactions carry a subtle pressure, even when it's not obvious. There's an underlying expectation, a direction the conversation is trying to move toward, a sense that something needs to happen. And even if it's unspoken, she can feel it. That pressure creates resistance. But when she's around a man who isn't pushing for anything, who isn't trying to control the outcome, who remains present without forcing the interaction forward, something begins to relax inside her. Her guard lowers, not because she's trying to let it down, but because it no longer feels necessary to keep it up. That's when the dynamic changes. She becomes more open in the way she speaks. Her body language softens. Her attention becomes more focused. And the interaction begins to feel less like a social exchange and more like a shared moment. And here's the part most men miss. It's not about what he's doing. It's about what he's not doing. He's not rushing. He's not pressuring. He's not trying to extract something from the interaction. And that absence of pressure is what creates the space for something deeper to develop. The second reason builds directly on this, but moves into something even more powerful. He makes her feel seen, not just desired. There's a difference between being looked at and being understood, and most women experience the first far more often than the second. They receive attention, compliments, interest. But that attention is usually focused on the surface. How she looks, how she presents herself, how she fits into someone else's idea of attraction. But very few men take the time to actually understand who she is beneath that. When a man pays attention in a different way, when he notices not just what she says, but how she says it, when he listens without trying to redirect the conversation back to himself, when he asks questions that invite her to think rather than perform, something shifts. She feels recognized on a deeper level, and being understood creates a kind of connection that physical attraction alone cannot replicate. Because in that moment, she's no longer just another person in his experience. She feels like an individual, someone whose thoughts, perspectives, and emotions actually matter, and that feeling stays with her. It creates a sense of familiarity, even if the interaction is new. A sense that this connection is different from the usual pattern she's experienced before. That's where attraction begins to move beyond the surface. Not because he said something impressive, but because he created an experience she doesn't often have. And when that experience is tied to him, when she begins to associate that feeling of being seen with his presence, the connection starts to deepen in a way that isn't obvious from the outside. The third reason is where things become even more subtle and often misunderstood. There's emotional tension that hasn't been rushed. Most men assume that moving quickly creates momentum, that pushing things forward, escalating the interaction, making intentions clear as soon as possible is what builds attraction. But in reality, rushing often does the opposite, because attraction isn't just about movement. It's about anticipation. It's about the space between moments, the pauses, the unspoken understanding that something is building but hasn't been fully expressed yet. When everything happens too quickly, there's no time for that tension to form, no time for curiosity to develop, no time for her mind to wander back to the interaction later and replay what happened. But when things unfold more slowly, when there's a natural progression instead of a forced one, that tension begins to grow on its own. She starts to notice the small details, the way he looks at her, the way he listens, the way he doesn't rush to fill every silence. And in those quiet spaces, something begins to build, not loudly, not dramatically, but steadily. And that steady build is what creates depth. Because now the interaction isn't just happening in the moment. It's continuing in her thoughts afterward. That's where real attraction lives. Not in what happens immediately, but in what lingers when it's over. The fourth reason this connection deepens is something even more internal and often goes completely unnoticed by most men. She feels a sense of emotional escape with him. Now, this doesn't mean she's trying to run away from her life or avoid reality. It's something much more subtle than that. Every person carries different roles throughout their day, expectations, responsibilities, versions of themselves that they present to the world, depending on where they are and who they're around. Over time, those roles can become heavy. She might be the one who's always composed, always strong, always put together, the one people rely on, the one who keeps everything balanced. And even though she carries that well, there's still a part of her that wants to step outside of it, even if only for a moment. And when she meets someone who allows that to happen naturally, without forcing it, without questioning it, without trying to define it too quickly, she begins to associate him with that sense of freedom. Around him, she doesn't feel like she has to maintain the same version of herself. She can be lighter, more spontaneous, more unfiltered. And that shift creates something powerful, because it's not just about attraction anymore. It's about how she feels when she's with him compared to how she feels everywhere else. If being around him feels like a release from pressure, if it feels like she can breathe differently, think differently, express herself without the usual constraints, that experience becomes something she naturally wants to return to. And here's what's important. He's not trying to create that effect. He's simply not interfering with it. He's not overanalyzing her. He's not questioning every behavior. He's not trying to control the direction of the interaction. He's allowing space. And in that space, she finds a version of herself she doesn't always get to access. That's what makes the connection feel different. The fifth and final reason brings everything together in a way that most men struggle to fully understand. He isn't chasing the outcome. This is where the dynamic completely shifts. Most men approach interactions with a goal in mind. Even if they don't say it directly, it's there in the background. They want something to happen. They want to move things forward. They're focused on where the interaction is going, rather than what it is in the moment. And that focus creates a subtle tension. It shows up in the way they speak, the way they react, the way they try to guide the conversation. It's not always obvious, but it's felt. And when that tension is present, it changes how she experiences the interaction. It creates a sense that there's an expectation attached to the connection, that something needs to happen rather than something simply unfolding. But when a man isn't attached to the outcome, when he's fully present without trying to push things in a specific direction, everything feels different. There's no pressure. There's no urgency. There's just the interaction itself. And that lack of pressure creates a kind of comfort that most people don't experience often. It allows the connection to develop at its own pace. It allows her to move toward him, rather than feeling like she's being pulled. And when someone chooses to move closer on their own, that choice carries more weight. It feels natural, it feels real, and it creates a stronger connection than anything that's forced. This is where most men get it wrong. They believe attraction is something they need to create through effort, through strategy, through saying the right things at the right time. But in many cases, attraction develops when effort is replaced with awareness, when control is replaced with presence, when urgency is replaced with patience. And when those shifts happen, the entire interaction changes, because now it's not about trying to make something happen. It's about allowing something to develop. And when you step back and look at all of these reasons together, a clear pattern begins to emerge. It's not about one moment. It's not about one action. It's not about one word. It's about the overall experience she has in your presence. Does she feel safe or does she feel pressure? Does she feel understood or does she feel observed? Does she feel curiosity or does she feel predictability? Does she feel freedom or does she feel expectation? And most importantly, does she feel like she's choosing the connection or does she feel like it's being pushed toward her? Because the answer to those questions shapes everything. Attraction isn't random. It's responsive. It responds to how someone feels in an interaction over time. And when the experience consistently feels calm, open, and unforced, something begins to build naturally. Something that doesn't need to be rushed. Something that doesn't need to be explained. Something that simply unfolds. So if there's one thing to take away from all of this, it's this. You don't need to convince a woman to move closer. You don't need to create attraction through force. You don't need to follow a set of steps or strategies. What you need is awareness. Awareness of how your presence affects the space around you. Awareness of whether you're adding pressure or removing it. Awareness of whether you're trying to control the moment or actually experiencing it. Because the men who stand out aren't the ones who try the hardest. They're the ones who understand the most. And sometimes that understanding is what creates the kind of connection that doesn't need to be explained at all. So now I'm curious. Which of these reasons surprised you the most? Let me know below.